Hi, I'm Bill Gold. I was born on March 17th, 1925 in Lincoln, Nebraska, and lived there for many years. Grew up there. My parents, really my grandfather came out to Nebraska. He came out to Sutton, Nebraska. And he came out here because of Horace Greeley, who told him to go west, young man, and he bought a railroad ticket as far as it would take him, and he went to Sutton and then moved up to Lincoln, and then married my grandmother, who was mayor, and then they moved on over to Iowa, where my father was born. Then my grandmother, who I never knew, wanted to come back to Lincoln with her parents and a larger Jewish community, so they did. And they opened up another store over there with another guy by the name of Cohen, who was a Catholic, and eventually became Golden Company, which is, you probably know something about it or seen pictures. That was the start of the family business. At any rate, Nate grew up in Lincoln and went off to World War I, never went to university, never went to high school, and was very successful as a businessman and very far-reaching, very philanthropic, and a very, probably the brightest man I ever knew. He built a atomic energy plant down in Sutton, down in, I forgot the name of the town, it's a little town. Certainly after the Second World War. It's now not working anymore because it was a sodium reactor. Now it's they're doing it entirely differently. At any rate, I grew up in Lincoln and had a wonderful time. We lived at 24th and South. I went to the public schools. I had lots of friends. Played. In those days, we didn't have all of the organizations that you have for kids, particularly after school. We played sandlot football. We did everything in the vacant lots, and there was lots of open spaces in this town where houses weren't. Now that's all filled in. At any rate, we had dancing clubs. We had all that sort of things. It was a great deal of interplay within the community. It was not a particularly Jewish community. We didn't have very many Jewish families in Lincoln. Lincoln was a little town. It was only 50,000. At any rate, I went on when the 1939, which was just before the war, when the war broke out in Europe. My father and mother had a big argument, which I sat in the room, and they argued about whether I should go to military school, but my father was very much for it, feeling that eventually I would be in the service, and if I knew something about military, it would be good. I was not a very highly disciplined kid, and it was a great experience going to a military school. And from the military school, I went directly into the Army, and then I went in OCS overseas, fought in Germany and France, had some marvelous experiences, which you probably have a book called And So to War, which my father wrote, had all of my letters that were typed up at the store, put in a book form, and that's And So to War. At any rate, I came home, and my sister, who I dearly adored, was then in college, and one thing another. Before I went to war, Louise, my sister, was known as my sister. She was Bill's sister. When I came back from the war, of course, she'd been there for many years, and I became known as Louise's brother. And she introduced me to a lot of people, really helped me get back into civilian life. It was a wonderful, wonderful lady. I was crazy about her. And I went to the University of Nebraska for a year, but it was not for guys who come back from the service. There was a lot of things that were kind of mixed up. although it was they had what they call the GI Bill of Rights, which was a marvelous thing for the nation. It was a wonderful program. I didn't take advantage of it. I probably should have, but I didn't. And I went to work for the family in the store. Went to work and became a assistant furniture buyer. Then I was a furniture buyer. Then I went to carpets and rugs and lamps, draperies, and that sort of thing. And of course, I had started in the store as a young kid. In those days, you had price tickets put on everything. You didn't have price tickets today. You used the UPC code. They check them out at the cashier. But in those days, everything had a price ticket on it. And 5 or 10 years, as a 10-year-old, I used to go down there on Saturdays or after school and put on price tickets. And so I was familiar with the store, and one thing or another. Eventually, I became president of the store, and my father, of course, was still there and very active in the community. And later, as part of the store, I was as something I also wanted to do. I was extremely active in the community, president of the Chamber of Commerce, the Red Cross, many other things, and very active, and was elected Man of the Year. It was a great community in which I really enjoyed it. It was a small enough community that you could have an impact. Now these communities have gotten so large, it's very difficult to have an impact in a community. At any rate, my family sold the store, and I stayed on as president for a while. I stayed on for 2 years, which mainly was a job of placing the executives that worked at Gold's in other institutions, both in the city and out of the state, around the country, got them placed, and I didn't like it anymore, and I quit. Stayed around Lincoln for another year and a half, trying to find something to do, and really didn't find anything, and so then moved to Colorado. This film is about Nebraska, what Nebraska really meant to me and to the family. Nebraska was a marvelous is a marvelous state, a marvelous institution. Nate was very much involved after I became president in politics in a hidden sort of way. He was a person who went around the country trying to get other industries to move to Nebraska and set up jobs, and he got several. He worked with a guy by the name of Charlie Price, and Nate and Charlie developed a great relationship with a lot of people. And this was in the days of Frank Morrison, who was governor, and other people. They were able to bring many industries, not to Lincoln and Omaha, but out in the western part of the state and in the smaller communities. Nate was also, and so were we, involved in a program called 4-H, which stands for Health, Heart, Head, and Hands, which is a big thing with the agricultural part of the state for young kids. It's a wonderful program, sponsored by the government, federal government, and the county agents are the people who really run that. He also was involved in, when I say he, we, in what's called the FFA and the FHA, which is Future Farmers of America, Future Homemakers of America. And this also is, Nebraska was and still is primarily an agricultural state, and so we're involved in that area. As a kid, I grew up, I was very much involved in Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts meant a lot to me. I got to be an Eagle, which I was very proud of, and I think it was a good thing for me to do. I don't know whether scouting is still a big thing anymore, but it was a great program to get involved in. It taught you to achieve and to have certain values, and it taught you a lot about history, it taught you a lot about yourself. It was a wonderful program. I enjoyed it. Some of my friends are still around. Dewey Doyle, of course, the biggest impact, well, I'm going to jump back. When during the war, they built a big air base in Lincoln. And a guy by the name of Joe Silverman came to town, married Helen, who was my cousin. And he is still a very close friend of mine. He's quite old now, he's 99, but had a lot of fun with Joe. I'm wandering all over the course. I don't.
That's fine, Bill. But I'd like you to go back and tell me the names of your grandparents.
All right, my grandparent, I was born on my grandfather's birthday, and that was he was also born on March 17th, and his name was William also, so he was William Gold 1, I'm William Gold 2, and they all insisted that I name my child William Gold 3, and he named his William Gold 4 against my idea. Well, at any rate, we got a dynasty of William Golds, and my grandmother, who was a mayor, who I talked about a little bit earlier, on the Gold side, was died in 1923. That was before I was born. I'm sorry, she was born and died in 1917, and of course I never knew her, and I understand she was a wonderful woman. My grandfather on my mother's side, my mother lived in Philadelphia, where my father met her, and I'm sorry, I met her in Boston, but she grew up in Philadelphia, and her father and mother, I never knew her father. He died in 1923, and he had a business that made dresses, and it was made for heavy women, and it was called Stylish Stouts. And then her mother, who was Ray, and oh, by the way, their name was Baum, Ray Baum, and I was nuts about her. She was just a terrific lady, a little tiny lady, but she understood me very well, and we had a great relationship. She died when she was 96 years old, and I had to, what's the right word for her? I was her executor of her estate, and her will, my grandfather's will, who was again a man I never knew, was a peculiar will, but I was told it was common if it was written back in the early 1920s. And she was playing golf when she was 92 years old, but I was pitch and putt. She just was an amazing lady. And my mother, by the same token, was a great horse woman. She was asked to ride in the big shows all over the Midwest for various people. The family had horses, and both my father and myself and Bob Simon, who was a cousin, used to go out and play polo a little bit. That's not true. We'd go out and hit the ball on horseback. We didn't have polo teams, and in those days nobody had that kind of money in Lincoln. So at any rate, we played did a lot of horseback things in our family, and that was very important. We took pack trips up into the mountains of Colorado and in Wyoming. That was a great summer that my sister and I and my parents, of course, guides, would take, and I remember those full well. They also used to go off and out to Estes Park. I can talk to you about some of my military experiences. which haven't got much to do with the state of Nebraska. My sister was then going to school in Chicago, and I finally got my bars, my officer's rating, and I went in to see her, and as I told you earlier, I really worshipped and loved and enjoyed my sister, but I was ready to kill her because I would walk down the street and she'd be beside me. She was 2 years young, 18 months younger than I, and various soldiers would salute me as we walked down the street, and she'd start laughing, and I was very proud of having earned that bar. That really upset me, but at any rate, we had a great relationship. I worshiped my father. He was a giant of a man, really in every respect. And when he sold the business and I moved out of Nebraska, I was very upset because I had to give up all my friendship, everything I'd worked for, everything I had trained for in all my life. And I thought, why did he do that? And fortunately, he did it because I had the opportunity to go out into another city where I was my own man, where I made my own future, where I did everything and got my own accomplishments. And I would never have done it if we'd have kept the institution. I'd have always been known as Nate's kid who had the silver spoon in his mouth all his life. But this way I got to go out and do it on my own. For that I'm very grateful. I've got nothing but wonderful, marvelous, terrific things to say about my father. And the store was known as a green stamp store. We used to give away what was called S&H green stamps. And at that time in the country, there was a savings. Now, in this era, you use your charge cards and you collect miles so you can fly on the airlines. But in those days, they collected little coupons, which if you collected enough of them, you could buy appliances or dishes or anything you wanted to buy with them. They turned into money. It was sort of a refund project. And it was very successful. We were probably the biggest store in this geographical area using that promotion. It was a great help to the business.
Bill, how did your grandfather happen to head west? Was there any family involved, or?
No, my grandpa came west. William Gold I came west because of Horace Greeley. He was born in Plattsburgh, New York, and it was a family of 7, and he eventually went down and worked for one of his brothers in New York City making neckties. And he didn't like his brother, he didn't like making neckties and everything else, and what money he got, he went to Sutton, he took the railroad as far west as he could go with the money that he had. That's where he ended up in Sutton, Nebraska, which is a little tiny town down in the southeast corner of the state. And then he moved up to Lincoln, and that's where he met my grandmother.
What did he do in Sutton? What kind of work?
What he did in Sutton, I really don't know, but he probably worked in a store. I don't know. I should say, you're talking about the history. I don't know whether it's still true, but Nate, my father, was inducted in the Nebraska Hall of Fame, and you can see a bust of him, bronze bust of him, at the state capitol. At the time he was inducted, he was the only Jew that was in it, and I don't know what the story is on that. It's quite an honor. I don't know what the rules are today, but in those days they only inducted one person every 10 years. So a lot of famous people were in there. Norris, Bryan, Willa Cather, et cetera, et cetera.
When your father first got started, was the store pretty a small store?
When my father got started, it was a small store over on P Street, and I think it was called Golden Company. The original store that my grandfather started was called the People's Store. But then they had sometime changed it to Golden Company, and my father had many things that he loved to do, and he was very smart. But one of the things he enjoyed most was building. He loved to build things, and he started building the buildings which you can still see in Lincoln. The building is still structured there, and he built it over a period of years. The first building was built in 1924, and then he kept on building and building and building, and now he covered about 3/4 of a block. In those days, you did not have, well, about the time that we sold the store, he sold the store, they were starting, branch retailing was becoming a big thing. He didn't ever feel that that was the right thing to do in Lincoln. He felt it was too small. So we never did it. He kept building and building downtown. He had a huge building downtown. And we had a full block of parking right across the street from the store. And then we had an outlet store where people could, if they bought furniture or appliances or other things that were major from us, we would buy theirs back and resell it. Now, of course, appliances we usually junked because they weren't any good, they were too old. But the furniture used furniture became a big business. We also had a little teeny tiny store. It was up on the university campus for odds and ends, a little ready to wear, but it didn't amount to anything.
Let's go back. I want to hear more about your military years.
My military years, well, I was inducted in Fort Ben Hara after I graduated from high school. Our whole class went into the war. Now, you got to remember that at that time, everybody was very patriotic and the country was unified. In growing up, and until probably the 60s, the country was very unified, extremely unified, and particularly during the war. And you either were in the service or you were participating in it in a war effort in some way. My mother made bandages and did a whole lot of other things, and my father led bond drives, selling bond drives. Well, anyway, I went into the service. I was 17 years old. Went into the service and then went up to Camp Perry, Ohio, after being inducted in Indianapolis at Fort Ben Harrison, and went through basic training up at Camp Perry, and then was sent to Officers Training School, which was down in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I was an artillery officer. And after being in the Fort Sill, that was quite an experience. I went through an officer training school. That was very intense. It was 90 days of intense work. And the day before I was to get my bars or my commission, and by the way, the commissioned officers had to buy their uniforms, and the enlisted men got their, the government gave them all their clothes and everything else. By the way, that's the term GI, which you may know. It refers to the clothes, to everything else the government gave them, and stands for government issue. And so that's what the soldier was called, a GI, and he was called a government issue anyway. I had bought all my uniforms and everything else, and I got the night of our graduation, to be graduated. They called me in and said they flunked me out, that I wasn't going to get to beat my bars, and it really tore me apart. It's the hardest thing I ever did to call, not ever did, but up to that stage, to call my parents and tell them that I was not going to get my bars, that I was going to be sent back to be a regular soldier, and that I'd washed out, flunked. And the reason they gave me, and they were right, was that a 17-year-old could not command men to death and take them into battle. So I was sent back to be a regular GI soldier for about 4 months. Then they called me up and they gave me said I had done enough duty and I was now at my 18th birthday and blah, blah, blah. And I was given my bars and I was sent out to California to Hunter Liggett, which was the Hearst estate out in Paso del Robles, and we were on maneuvers up in the mountains there, and it was February, and wet, cold, and it was awful weather, and they were testing whether they were going to use a horse or mules to fight in the mountains, or they were going to use jeeps. That is, they were going to use the method of transporting supplies and everything else. When I was in the horse mule area, I had been taught riding by my parents. I had also done a lot of riding at military school, and they thought I knew a lot about horses. Well, I learned a heck of a lot about horses at military school. Really thought and then when I got into the service, I learned even more. We lost a lot of animals because of the rain. The footing was bad, and they'd slip and slide. And of course, they were carrying heavy weights, and they'd slide down the mountain, and then we would have to go down and carry the equipment back. We'd leave the animal there, but it became mostly a pack outfit for the guys who were there. You carried the stuff on your back. At any rate, I was there a long time. There were many flings. People ask me why I always drink coffee with, it's cool. I always put ice in hot coffee. And in those days we had, it was, as I said, very cold up in the mountains, and we weren't allowed to have fires or anything else. Finally, they called off the maneuvers, and we were able to have fires, and we were able to get hot coffee. Well, we used to stand around, we'd have the coffee cups that the Army had were part of your canteen, and they were aluminum cups. And so they'd pour the hot coffee in it, and those cups were very warm. And we used to stand around with our shirts off and stand in a circle, and we'd rub the coffee cup on the guy's back ahead of you, and then we'd turn around and rub it on each other's belly, get warm. And so that's how I always liked to drink lukewarm coffee, still to this day. And people ask me why I put ice in it, and that's the reason. I just don't like hot coffee. At any rate, from there I went to troop training across country to Durham, North Carolina. Was there for a while, and then went back to SIL to become a sound flash officer. Then was sent overseas to France and to Germany as a replacement, and joined the 36th Infantry Division. And we fought through southern France and through into Germany. We crossed the Rhine at Mannheim and ran into the Siegfried Line. We had a lot of firing and a lot of firefights. I was with what was called a forward observer. Forward observer is a gallant fellow who shoots artillery, and it's too long to explain how that happens, but somebody up in the front has to tell the artillery where to shoot and how to shoot, and the artillery people actually firing the guns have no idea where the shells are going. but it was the forward observer's job to get the projectiles on the target. And you were always with the lead platoon, always with the lead squad, and you were do that. There were 3 guys with you. There were 2 guys to carry the radio. They switched off. It was so heavy. And then my job was to do the other. Well, at any rate, we were the first squad into Dachau, which was a concentration camp. And I have pictures of that. The government, in its wisdom, had not told us we were going to run into anything like that. We didn't have any idea what it was. And at any rate, it was an appalling sight, a very moving experience, and something I'll never forget. It's hard to describe. We made a horrible mistake there. There were all these men that were emaciated, and their eyes were bulging. I can't explain it to you. But at any rate, obviously they hadn't been fed. They were walking skeletons, and they wanted food. So we gave them our rations. Later, we were told by the medics that was probably the worst thing we could have done, because the Army gave us very high concentrated foods. We had what was called C rations, or 10-1 rations, which had lots of high caloric foods, which they couldn't eat or digest. It was very bad for them. We, of course, didn't know that. And then we went on and we fought down in southern Germany, and our company did not, but the company next to us was the one in the fight, in the line. Were the ones who captured Goering and von Rundstedt and many of the people that were in the Nuremberg trials. That was interesting. And then after that, my outfit was broken up, and I didn't have enough points to come home. So I was sent to run a prison, and I didn't know a damn thing about running a prison. I had no idea how, but that's what the Army wanted me to do, and so that's what I did. And there were 4 officers were assigned to do it, and 100 troops. None of us had had any training, but I was put in charge because I was what was called the senior officer. I had more rank than anybody else. We got it done. We had about 3,000 prisoners. And then later on, there was a race riot of the American troops in Europe, and I was still running the prison. And the order came down that any officer that was over 6 feet tall, who'd been in actual combat, had actually been shot at, was assigned to these race riot troops, and I was assigned to colored troops. In those days, I was assigned to colored troops, and I got a company or a battery of men. And it was a very interesting experience working with them. And then the government decided that I should go to take a displaced person train back to Budapest, which I did. Took a platoon of my men and about 500 injured DPs, displaced persons, back to Budapest. We went from basically what is now Vienna to Budapest, and I think you probably could drive it there and back in a couple hours. And it took us 3 months on a train to get it there because we were behind the Russian lines, and we could go maybe 5 kilometers a day, and then they'd hold us up for a couple of days. And it was a fascinating experience. Obviously, then I came home, but obviously the Army experiences made me grow up damn fast. You became a man in a hell of a hurry. You didn't survive, and that's my Army career boiled down to a few minutes.
When did the Gold family get into the grocery business?
Oh, the grocery business was a very key part of the business. There was my father built a building, one of the major buildings he built. It's a series of buildings, all tied together with the same architects, the same building materials. Unless you really know the history, you can't tell them apart. At any rate, he built a building, and it was completed in 1932, and it was that was the beginning and the real heart of the Depression in this country. And he had a good friend whose name was Harry Granger, and Harry was quite a guy. I knew Harry, but at any rate, I did know Harry, not well. I was a little boy. At any rate, Harry Granger talked my father into taking up some of the space. Why don't you have a grocery store and see what will happen? And so Harry Granger, who was a food wholesaler, it's sort of like Cisco or those kind of people today, got made to build a grocery store, which became one of the biggest grocery stores in the state because of the stamps, which I talked to you about before, because they had good food, they had good management, and it was really a great grocery store. They also had right next to it, physically, a restaurant that was probably as well known as anything else in the store. It was served certain foods they had. One I can still remember called the Plantation Shortcake, but it was an excellent restaurant, and very crowded all the time. And the two went hand in hand. But the grocery store was had started. The first man they hired to run the grocery store was a guy by the name of Leon Adelson, and Leon later left the store, opened up his own grocery business, which was called Leon's. It was very successful. And then another guy who ran the business, the grocery business, by the name of Sam Davidson, who also left and started his own grocery business. And that, I should say, happened a lot. It was one of the things that I enjoyed and my father enjoyed, to see people that we had worked with, had trained, and go off and be successful on their own. Well, I would like to say that I hope everybody has as good a life as I've had. I hope everybody can enjoy life as I've enjoyed it. The world has been good to me. I've had basically everything that I wanted. But I would like to add a couple of things. I have learned more and become a better person because of difficulties and because of problems and because of adversaries that I had to solve the problems. The hardships really make you what you are. I've talked about the Army. I could talk about my school days. I could talk about business. I could talk about everything. I could talk about married life. And I really think you should not shirk difficulties. You should work through them. I also want to say that it is extremely important to realize that you do not do it yourself. You have to have people with you. You have to have mentors. You have to have a team. You have to have people pulling with you. You cannot do it by yourself. It's impossible to do it by yourself. At least that's what I believe. I've had some wonderful mentors, some wonderful team players with me who really allowed me to be successful, to do what I'm doing, and I'm ever grateful to them. I hope I've given back to the community as much as some of these men did to me. And last but not least, we are in a democratic society. We're in a society where It is extremely important to become part of the community. I don't care what you're involved in, but be involved in something that gives back to the community, because we are very fortunate. The most important, most valuable thing that ever happened to me in my life. I have a wonderful wife. I have 3 terrific kids. I've got great grandchildren, but the most important thing, and the luckiest thing that ever happened to me in my life, was I was born in the United States, and I'm a U.S. citizen, and I really mean it. Well, I'm concluding this interview, and I'm very grateful to the people that asked me to talk a little bit about the history of Nebraska, or the Gold family in Nebraska. And life, as I said earlier, has been awful good to me, awful good to me. And it's been made good by various people, primarily my wonderful wife, Bailey, who has taken care of me and been a great help in many, many ways. Helped me in the business, helped me in making decisions. Will, you, Kathy, and Betsy have all been, I can't ask for better kids. You've all done great things. You've made me very, very proud. And those, you little ones, from the 3-year-old on up to you, Alex, I love the trips with you. I love the enjoyment of being with you. You're all going to be proud citizens, proud parents, and God bless you all. Thanks for making me, giving me so many happy hours, so much enjoyment. I love you all.
Old family get into the grocery business?
Oh, the grocery business was a very key part of the business. There was my father built a building, one of the major buildings that he built. It's a series of buildings, all tied together with the same architects, same building materials. Unless you really know the history, you can't tell them apart. At any rate, he built a building, and it was completed in 1932, and it was that was the beginning and the real heart of the Depression in this country. And he had a good friend whose name was Harry Granger, and Harry was quite a guy. I knew Harry, but at any rate, I did know Harry, not well. I was a little boy. At any rate, Harry Granger talked my father into taking up some of the space. Why don't you have a grocery store and see what'll happen? And so Harry Granger, who was a food wholesaler, it's sort of like Cisco or those kind of people today, got Nate to build a grocery store, which became one of the biggest grocery stores in the state, because of the stamps, which I talked to you about before, because they had good food, they had good management, and it was really a great grocery store. They also had, right next to it, physically, a restaurant that was probably as well known as anything else in the store. It was served certain foods. They had one I can still remember called the Plantation Shortcake, but it was an excellent restaurant, and very crowded all the time. And the two went hand in hand. But the grocery store was had started. The first man they hired to run the grocery store was a guy by the name of Leon Adelson, and Leon later left the store, opened up his own grocery business, which was called Leon's. It was very successful. And then another guy who ran the business, the grocery business, by the name of Sam Davidson, who also left and started his own grocery business. And that, I should say, happened a lot. It was one of the things that I enjoyed and my father enjoyed, to see people that we had worked with, had trained, and go off and be successful on their own.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I started in 1952, February. Went in and applied at their employment office up on 5th floor, and had a lady who I had no knowledge of, a cold turkey type interview, said, well, we'll take your application, and if we can use you, we'll call you. And about a week later she called and she says, would you come back for a second interview? And her name was Harriet Heineman, and she became a very good friend over the years of employment, and I was there almost 18 years. I left in 1969. In fact, she was a founding member of a 15-year club that Gold started, which was an older group of employees that Nathan recognized and celebrated once a year with a dinner at one of the hotels here in Lincoln. And she was personnel assistant director for Golden Company for many, many years. They had a training program that every employee was expected to be a part of, and was given time to ingest all of their thoughts and ideas and business philosophies. And the main thing that came out of all that was that the customer's always right, even if they're wrong. And one of the things that always, the older employees always talk about is the fact that an individual brought back a leather belt and complained that this leather belt wore out too fast. And Nathan happened to be walking through the men's department as this person was voicing his opinion, and he just told the employee, take care of this gentleman, please. And that belt was actually 5 years old. This guy was a construction worker, and the belt had been sweat out, but it was replaced totally free of charge by direction of Nathan Gold, and that was Nathan's policy. The customer was always right, and customer service is paramount in every department. So you learned that from day one, and it was a philosophy that you lived by, and the customer lived by. They knew that they were going to be taken care of at Golden Company. So it was an interesting experience for me, all those 18 years, or 17, almost 18. You might say I grew up in that company because I was quite young when I started there. And I can't think of a better business education or philosophy that you could come to live by than to have worked for Golden Company. I started out as a carryout in the grocery department, loading people's groceries up, taking them out to their car, and then shagging grocery carts out of the parking lot back to the grocery department, and that was where I was for the first 30 days that I was with Golden Company. Eventually moved on to the produce department, learned how to prepare vegetables for sale, and from there went into the frozen food and dairy department, managed that for a while, and then managed the grocery department in total for 4 or 5 years, and eventually became the assistant manager of the grocery department, and then the manager. And this helped me to find other employment when needed arise. And I don't know anything other than the food business, or didn't until retirement. And I don't think I know anything about food business today, because nobody in this world, no matter whether it's the food business or any type of retailing, operates with the philosophy that Nathan Gold built his business on. And that's about all I can tell you. Is it's a way of life that stuck with anybody that ever worked with or for Gold's.
When you were working there, was it one of the leading grocery stores here in Lincoln?
It was not only the leading grocery store in Lincoln, but in the state of Nebraska. From 1951 until I'd say about 58, this was true. Competitors came along or emerged that had bigger volume in Omaha. Bakers come into the business. Also, Hinky Dinky came into the business, and they started building stores, Hinky Dinky in Lincoln, and their first operation was like at 25th and O, and when that store was built, it was on the lifeline to the eastern edge of the city, and it had a definite effect on the food basket operation. And from that point on, with all of the other new competitive stores being built in the city of Lincoln, the business and food basket deteriorated, and of course Gateway Shopping Center was built shortly thereafter, and had a definite effect on Nathan's downtown location and business there also.
Bill was telling me something about a couple of employees that you had went on to start their own grocery stores here in Lincoln. Are you aware of that?
I believe that Leon Adelson probably worked for Golden Company prior to 1951. In fact, it might have been before World War II. Leon, before World War II, for a short period of time, was at 14th and South, and had a small operation there on the corner, northwest corner of that intersection, and then had to go to service during World War II. And when he came back, he opened up a small store at 17th and South for a short period of time, and then moved on down to Winthrop Road and South, in a shopping center, one of Lincoln's first shopping centers after the World War II, and became a very strong factor in that neighborhood. And of course, at that time, that particular area was the higher income folks of Lincoln, and Leon had a very good business there.
And then over the years, you probably really got to know the grocery business and know the Gold family.
Yes, it was always amazing, you know, Mrs. Gold, Evelyn, Nathan's wife, would shop the store, but we knew she was also shopping out there at Leon Adelson's store because it was close to her home. And it was amusing in a way, you know, but in visiting with her when she was in the store, and she was always a pleasant person when she'd tell us Well, Leon carries it, you ought to have it. So, that was a command decision then to get it into your inventory.
Have you seen a major difference between the grocery stores of yesterday and the stores of today?
Oh, yes. Before I come into this grocery business, the only contact I had was shopping with my parents. And this goes back to probably prior to World War II. Golden Company, I think in maybe 36 or 7, somewhere along in there, they started in the grocery business in a basement operation in the northeast corner of their building on O Street. And you went down this long marble stairway with big round brass polished rails. And I was just a little kid and was always amazed, I was holding on to that rail because this was scary, But we'd go down there and there was a complete grocery store in that basement with a meat market, produce, all kinds of canned goods. And I'll tell you a little risque story. A kid always has to investigate, and I had to go to the restroom. Well, the restroom was on through that grocery department, going down into a marking room or receiving room where they would receive goods for the whole shopping complex. And of course they were separated down there and marked and taken out onto the floors of various departments. So there was a central male restroom. And this always intrigued me because, at home you did what was at the home, And we had modern facilities, but you walk into this place, and I thought, man, I gotta be careful here, I'll fall in this sucker, because it was one of these big walk-ups. Maybe I was 3 foot tall at the time, and the bar up here, the valve to flush this thing was higher than I was. It was like, woo! So that's my memory of, Gold's Food Basket beginning. And of course, over the years, that came out of the basement. Nathan moved down 11th Street, buying building after building, and that grocery department went from building to building as Nathan bought and expanded newer construction. He'd tear the buildings down eventually, and finally, he wrapped that block 3/4 of the way around with his operations. But eventually it wound up it had to be right at wartime, to the block south on 11th Street. And this building was, as I understand it, an old livery stable, and had a big horse feeding operation in it, with a big elevator to lift these hay and feed up to the second floor. Anyway, during the war years, that grocery department was in there, because I remember the very day of victory over Europe. My father worked at Meade Ordnance Plant up here at Meade, and he happened to be off during the day. You shifted shifts, 8-hour shifts. You worked 30 days at this one, and then you went to graveyard and so on around the work schedule. Well, he happened to be home, and Mom had picked out a movie at the Lincoln Theater, which was on N Street between 12th and 13th on the south side, and she wanted to see that movie. So my dad, Mom, and I went to that movie. Can't tell you what the movie was, but when we left the movie, we were going to go to Gold's Food Basket to shop. And we went over there, and coming out of the store was a couple who my parents knew extremely well, Wes and Ida Finney. And they had armloads of groceries, sacks. During the war, you didn't have egg cartons. In fact, I don't know when the egg carton came out, but eggs were, if you bought eggs, a dozen eggs, you put them in a sack yourself. And here on top of this sack that Wes was carrying was these eggs. And Wes and I just said to my parents, have you heard the news? They had the radio on in the food basket here, and the war's over in Europe. And my dad looked at Wes and looked at those eggs and took that sack, and he started throwing eggs out into the street. That night, we went down on Oak Street, parked east of Gold's in front of Harley Drug, which was right across 11th Street, and watched the crowd. And it was, you could not imagine the exhilaration of the public. It was just like, we have gone nuts. People were dancing, drinking, yelling, singing, kissing, hugging. It was really neat to see. And I was probably 10 years old at the most. I'd never seen anything like that before.
In the years that you worked in the store, did you work a lot of hours?
It was amazing. Gold's, when I started to work there in 51, was open on Thursday nights. They were closed Sundays. So it actually worked out that that store was only open about 50-some hours a week. Eventually, it got to open every night until 9 o'clock. And that was the case from Thanksgiving to Christmas, back when Gold's owned it. But Brandeis, when they come along, they wanted to open it up on Sundays, and it became a scheduling problem, which changed the complexion of the employment considerably over the years. But it was a neat place to work, and they provided health insurance. They had an on-site nurse that would help you fill out all these insurance papers that you had to file, and help you take advantage of the system to the nth degree. If you didn't understand the insurance papers, she was gonna work you through it. So it was a total package of
Must have been a good place to work.
Extremely. Yep. Extremely. They didn't pay big wages, but who was making big wages, back in those days? But Nathan was an extremely good person in the community, supported the 4-H program. He would have the management of the food basket go to the 4-H auction, which was held at the fairgrounds, and buy championship beef. Pay top dollar for this championship beef when he could have been, bypassing all that and buying better beef, to be honest about it, right from a packer. What you didn't know was you looked at a critter in the ring. Oh, he looks good. Well, he was wiped down with oil, had a shiny coat. He had great conformation because he'd been fed molasses to put on weight, to look good. But when you cut that sucker open, you'd send it to the packer, and the packer would do his thing, and you'd get back this carcass and we were cutting carcass beef in those days, quarters and halves. So it'd come in as swinging beef. And we had like 17 people in our meat department, butchering staff that operated in a cutting room situation, and then we had self-service or service counter where you had people that were in charge of the chicken, the pork, the hamburger, the steak department, the roast department, so that when the lady came in, started down that meat aisle, started with steaks, roast, and went right on down. You had an individual person that was a specialist in that particular cut that you were looking for, that was waiting on you and showing you, oh, I don't like that. No, that doesn't look too good. Put back in there, dig down through the pile. How's that one? So, it was service plus. But that darn 4-H beef was fed so much sorghum by, and directed by the county extension agents to do this, to get confirmation and coat and all this, that meat, as soon as it was exposed to air, it turned black. And you had a heck of a time selling this stuff. It was syrupy. You know how molasses is? That's the color of the beef that you were going to be faced with. And Golden Company, sent a lot of that down to the People's City Mission that they had paid top dollar for, so that they could support a program that Nathan really, was behind, but it cost them a lot of money that the customer never ever thought about, or the public never knew about.
Who was behind all the innovations that went on in the store?
No, are you talking about just Food Basket, or?
Yes.
Actually, Nathan was an extremely good friend of the Granger family. I can't remember those names. I can see faces, but I can't remember first names. But the Granger family owned the IGA franchise in Lincoln, and I'm sure they were in the same social clubs and so on, these business gentlemen. And Nathan took advantage of their expertise in the grocery industry because they were a Lincoln firm, and I'm sure the social aspect had something to do with it. But when it came to buying equipment and trying to get the best price and the latest equipment, they would rely on their technical, Granger's technical department for that direction.
And how about your role as you moved up through the ranks? Did you carry a lot of weight in each department and in the store in general?
Well, eventually getting to the management end of the business, yes, yeah. We completely redone the physical layout several times over the years, and when that portion of the building, that southwest portion of Gold's building, was built in 50 and 51, the first floor had a alley. Originally there was an east-west alley that went through, paralleled N and O, it was straight through. Well, at some point, and I can't tell you, it was during the war years, they closed that alley, but they brought it out to the south. So it was an L shape in a quarter of the block, serviced by that alley going around that portion that they finished in 51. That was a hindrance to the grocery department in a way, in that you had to go outside, cross the alley, and come back in to get in the grocery department from the department store side. So it was always our idea in the food basket to see if there wasn't a way we could get that alley vacated. And it took, I'm sure, some long sessions by our legal staff at the city council to get that job done. But eventually, and it was after Brandeis bought the business that come about, and we completely changed the configuration of the grocery department at that point, and opened it up to where they could come right off the selling floor in the department store into the food basket. And I don't know that, looking back at that, you know, the times were such that you had a lot of competition coming into Lincoln. I'm not sure that it was all worth the expense that we went to at that point. I think had we have done that years before, it would have worked out a lot different. But competition being what it was, why it had an effect, you know, a good effect on the business, but not as good as it would have had you not had all the competitive activity, outside competitive activity.
Kind of sounds like the operation was ahead of its time, too.
Oh, definitely. Yep.
And what was your opinion of the Gold family, Nathan Gold and Bill Gold?
The day he announced the sale to Brandeis, I've never seen so many adult people bawl. You know, they loved the man. His judgment was our life, our well-being, and it was like getting hit in the head, you know, with a bolt of lightning when he announced the sale at a general meeting of the store that morning. And there was people who said, well, I know where I'm going, and a lot of them did leave right away because they could see that the competitive activity in the community had shifted, and it was time to make a change. I hung around for 6 more years. Probably would have been better off really had I accepted an offer that was made at the time. But you know, when you're in the groove, you want to stay with it, which I did. But I'm not unhappy about it. It was good training, and it served me well.
And your relationship with Bill has lasted all these years.
Oh, definitely. Yep. Yep. He and I talk by phone every once in a while, and he's always asking how the family is and has an interest in you as an individual. So, yep, good deal.
Tomorrow after the noon headlines from NPR News, Tears in the Dark by Michael and Elizabeth Norman.
You know, we can talk about like Sam Pasca. I'm sure that he was Jewish, but I don't know. You know, if somebody would say prove it, I would have a hard time saying what temple he belonged to in the city of Lincoln. But he was retired out of the grocery business when I was coming into knowledge and management at Gold's. But he stayed active in a organization called the Lincoln Food Retailers Association. In fact, he was the secretary for a good long time before his health deteriorated to the point that he couldn't do it anymore. I think his store was like at 23rd and R Street or Q. The building's still there. And I talked to a fellow that was my associate last night, and he says, well, I'm sure that's where his store was, but he says, and he grew up down that area, this individual, and he says, my folks didn't trade there, so he says, I can't tell you that much about it. But then there was a Howard Watman, And I think he had several different stores around the city. One of them would have been, I think, at somewhere around 27th and Holdridge. And eventually he moved out on South 14th Street across from the penitentiary and built a one-story unit that was kind of like a country, you know, it was at the edge of town at the time, like the Penn was at one time. And he operated that for quite a while and done a nice business out there. Then there was Leon Adelson, who we mentioned earlier, and he ran a very good operation. He had a nephew by the name of Sam Davidson, and he helped his uncle with that business, and they built that business into, you know, an independent, probably at one point, after Gold's lost their prominence, was the leading independent in the city of Lincoln, dollar volume-wise. Max Kushner. Max is a generation before me, but his family had 3 sons, and that was Jerry, Dwayne, and Sheldon. And Jerry, I think, died young. I didn't know him personally, but Dwayne I knew personally because he was in the Lincoln Retailers Association. He was president of that retail association when I was active in it. And he was second generation and built onto their business reputation, built a new store down on North 27th called King Dollar. And it had a lot of dry goods as well as groceries, which eventually was torn down, and I think the family still owns the ground, but I think that's where the McDonald's sits today on North 27th. Shelley, or Sheldon, his brother, wound up running the family's business interests, after Dwayne passed away a number of years ago. And Dwayne died early. He died before he was 65. And Shelley lived on into his 80s, I think. Shelley at one time ran a store over Hamburg, Iowa. And all of these operations, I think, were serviced by United AG out of Omaha. Earl Diamond also had an operation at 27th and Holdridge. Then there was Nate Bernstein, and he had the operation down at 33rd and A. The building's still there. It's still, part of it's still a grocery store. But Nate passed away years ago. And then Schreier's, and you may remember the Schreier's that had the Ford dealership in Omaha. Let's see, that would be a grandson of the original Schreier grocery store, which was 10th and South here in Lincoln. And Joe Schreier and Morris were brothers that came, I don't know whether directly from Poland to Lincoln, but they were born in Poland and eventually wound up here. And they each had a son. Joe had a son by the name of Seymour. Seymour's still living in the area. He would be a good one for you to talk to if you want more information about the Jewish grocers here in Lincoln. Seymour had a son by the name of Stan, and Stan's son is the one that had the car dealership in Omaha. So, and then Cy Kaminsky. This guy had a grocery store. He's still alive, Cy Kaminsky, and he has a electrical and refrigeration parts business over here in Havelock. So there's an individual that's could be a history resource for you also, as well as Seymour Schreier, and I've got Seymour's telephone number here for you. There's a family by the name of Klein that was in the grocery business for years here in Lincoln. I'm sure they're not Jewish. They're German-Russian people. But one of those individuals, Wes Klein, is still alive, and he would be a good resource for information on the Lincoln grocery. In fact, he has, the last time I knew, he still had a lot of pictures of old grocery operations, one of which was, I think, of Strassheim, might have been Jewish, I'm not sure, that goes back to a butcher shop when they were still able to shoot antelope, deer in this area. You see all that salt marsh out here west of Lincoln was a natural congregation place for not only ducks but also wildlife of all sorts. And this Strassheim had a butcher shop that Wes has a picture of, with these guys with beards and long white aprons and this stuff hanging on meat hooks in this shop, as well as ceiling lights, that hang way down. Yeah, you'd like to see this one, I think. And Wes is alive. I will have to look to see if I can find a phone number for him, but he'd be an interesting person to talk to. That's about it for me. One thing that Gold and Company had in the food basket was a delivery service. It was unique in a way in that we had delivery trucks that would actually, had enough of them that would segment the city at the time, and different teams would deliver to certain areas, and I think it was like Wednesday through Saturday morning that these deliveries would occur. Things that were bought after 2 o'clock would be delivered the next morning. Prior to that, they would go out that day. And we had wooden boxes. In fact, I've got one out in the garage that I'll get here and show you in a little bit. It was made by the Folding Box Corporation. These things would hold yay-so by yay-so by yay-so amount of goods. And say you had a lady that had a shopping cart full of groceries, it'd probably take 3 boxes at least to handle that grocery cart. And you'd put all the refrigeration things together to kind of hold the temperature, rather than putting milk in one and then putting a can of coffee up next to it. You put all the refrigerated together so it'd stay cool. And of course you deliver it within a certain time frame, so it was still cool when you got it. And even frozen food, you'd stick it in later years in the insulated bag and it'd make it all right in that delivery service. The delivery service was free. Believe that or not, here you're running trucks and people around, and you didn't add to the price of your goods to cover that. This was free, and that was one way that we did maintain our volume in the food basket as long as we did, and it worked out extremely well. Yeah. And that started back, actually, I think probably at the end of World War II, and carried up into probably 65 or so. Yeah. A good 20-year period anyway. It's folded flat, and you just swing it open, and the bottom will drop down, and you'd have a nice sturdy unit to to deliver those groceries in. We had hundreds of these boxes over the years, and Nathan maintained a carpenter shop to handle all of the maintenance throughout the store, and if something happened to one of these boxes, the carpenter shop could bring it back to life again.